What if I was to tell you in this season that, in fact, everything that you are currently going through right now, whether it be all the persecutions, all the hardships, all the, the decreasing and the losses and everything of that nature, what if I was to tell you that this isn't an ongoing attack that the devil orchestrated? Hold up, bear with me. What if it is the simple fact that it's not the devil that has been orchestrating this attack? It's not the devil, in fact, that has planned this out. But what if I was to tell you that indeed, in fact, that it was actually God orchestrating this plan all along? That it was God putting you through the hardships. That it was God putting you through the persecutions. It was God putting you through the losses. It was God putting you through these exact things, that is not only to test your faith, but to strengthen your perseverance, to build up your character, to build up your faith, to build up your trust in Him. What if God orchestrated this to allow for you not only to be humbled and to be developed in character and to be developed in generosity and servitude, but also, it is also used in fact that when you are able to get out of this and when you are able to overcome this, you won't solely say it was all you, but in fact, you can solely say that it was only by God, and it was only by His hand, it was only by His will, and it was only by His strength in which the reason why you were able to make it out of the situation where you felt like that you were not going to make it out alive in the first place. Now, as I was reading 2 Corinthians 12, it was basically Paul talking to the Corinthian church about how God had gave him this divine revelation, this divine vision of where he was caught up to the third heaven. But the one thing I noticed while I was studying the scripture was that Paul was speaking in third person. Paul was speaking in third person as if, you feel me, he was telling somebody else's story, not knowing that it was actually him that received that vision, that received that catching away to the third heaven, in which, God given him. The only reason why Paul did not, in fact, say that was him was because he did not want to take the glory, nor did he want to take the credit in which only God was to be able to take the credit and the glory for. Because I'm pretty sure with that type of revelation back then, I'm pretty sure you were looked at as a spiritual guru. I'm pretty sure you were looked at as very anointed, highly favorable in the eyes of many people. And that leaves room for people to put you on a pedestal. That leaves room for people to put you up and idolize you as a god. And Paul was too humble, and he had too much humility to, be served like that. He had too much, humbleness for people to, bow down to him and worship him as if he was God. Now, as Paul actually received this revelation, there was something that had occurred. And I want to read this to y'all. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. And it says, "And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And He said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I would rather boast in my infirmities, than the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." As Paul gets done, receiving the revelation, and he's talking to him in this third person, God does something very unique. God does something very, very strategic in regards to, the response of, Paul, telling this revelation. And it wasn't the fact that God was mad that Paul did, in fact, share this revelation. The one thing I found out is that a thorn in the flesh, that is something symbolic. It is something metaphorically, speaking about, in regards to spiritual warfare. What I found out what a thorn in the flesh means is literally an annoyance or an irritability that occurs in somebody's life. And in that case, in regards to Paul, that was that spiritual warfare. Paul basically was talking about how this spiritual warfare or this spiritual attack was, a messenger of Satan that had came to, bring him to a low place in his life after sharing this, revelation. Now, we can all see that this was something that Paul was going through that was probably most likely mental, because we know that the one main thing that the enemy does is the enemy attacks your mind. And if the enemy can attack your mind, the enemy can attack every place else, in your life, because everything starts off with the mind. Which is why we should always, according to Ephesians 6, is always, take upon, the full armor of God. One of those things is the helmet of salvation. As we see, Paul is pleading to God. And he's like, God, take this all away from me. I can't do this. I rebuke this. And instead of God taking this attack away, all God tells him is that my grace is sufficient for you. For it is my strength which is made perfect in weakness. And I know this probably made Paul all confused. All God could say is that my grace is sufficient, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And what God had to show Paul is that, Paul, I don't want you to get too ahead of yourself. Paul, I don't want you to exalt yourself higher than what these men or what these people are trying to make you out to be. Now I know you're a humble son. Now I know your heart, and I know you do not want to get to a place where you want to be, exalted above me. But I need to make you low. Because I need to remind you, I need to put you in a place of lowliness so that you can recognize and remember who I am in you. That you will never get beside yourself. So that you won't get glory out of this situation, but that so I can get the glory out of it. And it wasn't until Paul came to that low place, it wasn't until Paul was humbled, God had stopped him right in his tracks before he can exalt his own self, or before others could, in which God was able to work in Paul, in which God was able to allow Paul to go through the hardships, allow him to go through the persecution, allow him to go through all the distresses of life, so that he could be able to develop that mindset, so he could be able to develop, that strength to be able to overcome every obstacle that was meant, to tear him down. And as for the thorn in the flesh, I said, think about it as you getting a very bad bruise, very bad cut, or anything that required for you to go to the emergency room. With that bruise, whatever that had caused you to go to the emergency room, it had to bring you down to a low place. And it brought you down so much to a low place that you had to go to the emergency room. And you had to get checked out by a doctor. And now you're on the operation table. And now the doctor has to work on you. The doctor has to fix you up before you can leave out of the emergency room as a new person. Before you can operate out of the new emergency room healed and restored and refined. That's the same thing God had to do to Paul. And I know it's the same thing that God is having to do for many of you guys in this season. Many of you need to realize that the season you're in is not in vain. Just because you've had some losses, just because you're going through so much distress and persecution, or it feels like that you've gone back to a place in which you felt like God had already taken you out of years and years ago, does not mean that God's punishing you. And it does not mean that you're going backwards. Sometimes before we cross over to our new, sometimes before we walk into our breakthrough, God sometimes has to place us at a low place. And he has to place us so before we walk into this new thing, we won't get braggadocious, we won't become prideful, and we won't get ahead of ourselves. So him making us low and him allowing for these, this persecution to weigh us down and to break us down, it's all more for your protection, more than it is to harm you. Because even through it all, God's not going to allow the devil, he's not going to allow the enemy to do more than what God has allowed him to do. Think about God when he used Satan for Job. He said, you may test my son, but you cannot kill him. And a lot of us, I think God is having us realize a lot of us need to learn to enjoy the journey. I think so many of us have gotten beside ourselves and we've been so much waiting for the destination instead of being appreciative, instead of remembering where we came from, instead of enjoying the journey, while we're in it. Because it's not about where you get to. Because trust me, God's going to get all of us there. But it is simply about the journey. Because what comes with the journey, it comes with you meeting so many people along it. So many people need your light. So many people need your words of encouragement. So many people need that seed in which you carry through the power and through the authority in which the Spirit brings out of you. And many of you don't realize is that by God bringing you back to that low place, by God bringing you back to them old spaces, old places, around those old people, God is not doing it to punish you. But in fact, God is using it. He's using you for you to go back and to bring those out who are currently still there, who are going through the same exact thing that God already brought you out of. They need that leader, and you are that person. God is teaching a lot of us generosity. He's teaching a lot of us servitude, a lot of us compassion and love, not to get ahead of ourselves. Read Jeremiah 9:23-24. Also 2 Corinthians 10:17-18. God is looking for those who are going to glory to only glory in him, not glory in themselves. God is using this moment to humble you. And God is using that low place to bring others out. Allow it to happen. It's bigger than you. God bless.